The cases of child abandonment in South Africa are on a dramatic rise. This, of course, is according to Statistics South Africa. According to the reports, there are around 3,500 children abandoned in South Africa every year. Earlier this week, an infant was rescued from a stormwater drain in Newlands East in Durban. It's alleged the baby was abandoned a few meters from where she was rescued. According to the National Adoption Coalition of South Africa, 65% of all orphaned children are newborns, while 90% of them are under a year old. Now, to further the discussion, we are joined in studio by Robyn Wolfson Vorster, who is a child protection activist. And as I said, she's live from our studios in Johannesburg. Good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for coming through.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on the show.
Now, the numbers that I've just mentioned on my introduction, really, they are very much devastating. 3,500 children abandoned in South Africa every year.
Well, that's correct, but unfortunately we don't actually know if those figures are confirmed or not, because that's quite an old statistic. The research was done in 2010, and what's very important about that figure is we're talking about 3,500 children who survive abandonment every year. And we think that probably for every one child that survives, 2 don't survive. So already we're looking at about 10 children a day surviving abandonment, and unfortunately countless others that are not surviving the abandonment process.
So the situation may be worse than what we have now, what we see now.
Yes, it's fairly certain that the situation is worse than what we see on paper.
Yeah.
Plus, unfortunately, we don't have any recent research. We've been trying to persuade government to do research since 2013. So we can at least quantify and get some sort of feel for what we can do in response to that kind of that level of problem.
What was your reaction when you saw the story from Newlands East in Durban, where a child was rescued from the drain?
I was very moved. I have to say I had very mixed emotions. So devastated for the biological mother who had made such a decision to abandon her child, and so unsafely, and also devastated for that little girl, that she had gone through such incredible trauma, but obviously just relieved by the fact that she had been saved. So grateful to the people who were responsible for saving her. And I have to say, you know, for me this is a miracle, because she certainly did survive against the odds.
It certainly is. And I think, Robyn, really the question is, why would a mother carry the child for a full 9-month term and, you know, just abandon her like that?
Well, I think this is the question that a lot of us are grappling with, and I think people are understandably angry when they read stories and see footage of situations like this. And I do think that that anger is justified, but we also need to understand that abandonment is a decision of desperation. So it is often a woman who herself feels abandoned. Sometimes that baby was conceived in violent means through rape or incest. We often look at non-consensual sex when it comes to abandonment. We also look at factors like poverty and unemployment. Often, and this is a devastating thing in South Africa, but we are often found with situations where mothers are having to choose between existing children and the child that they've now carried, as you say, for 9 months, and deciding to feed the ones that the older children.
But I think it goes back to a very important issue of sex education and perhaps access to proper family planning facilities.
Absolutely, and I think that the MEC did make that link with the story this week and spoke specifically about the need for family planning. I think we do need to say that it's broader than that, though, because, as I mentioned, we are often looking at situations where there wasn't planning, there wasn't thought, it wasn't a situation where it was where it was a loving sexual relationship, where we need to also educate men in particular about their role and their role in ongoing parenthood. And also we need to look at some of the programs that we have in place for dealing with crisis pregnancies. So often women will report that they'll go to a clinic and try and seek assistance from either a nurse or a social worker and be told, you've made this mess, you now have to raise this child. So they're not giving any option counseling, and that is very problematic. So if you're already feeling desperate and you're not in a situation where you feel like you're being guided or helped, then often the only decision is this worst case decision, which is to abandon your baby.
Because I want us to dwell a little bit on the reasons. What could be the reasons? You've made mention of not non-consensual sexual activities that may have taken place. But do you believe the issue of absent fathers or fathers who would not want to take the responsibility of the pregnancy are also contributing here.
Absolutely. Yes, in fact, a lot of women who are interviewed and who are brave enough to talk about their abandonment story will say that they feel like they were abandoned first. That if the father had been present and been willing to take care of them and take care of the child, that they might have been able to make a better decision. We're also often looking at underage children as well. So unfortunately in this country, if you are under the age of 18, you cannot make a decision to place your child for adoption without your own parents' consent. So if you feel that you don't want your family to know about a pregnancy, often the feeling is the only response is to abandon. So I think structural support systems in terms of family, in terms of community, in terms of the biological parents, it's very, very important.
But I believe there shouldn't be an excuse for abandoning a child in a water drainage, for example, because there are alternatives. There are orphanage homes, there are adoption centers as well.
Absolutely. Look, I think unfortunately a lot of women don't know that they've got alternatives, and that's the biggest problem. We do see that abandonment happens on a spectrum. So on the one end, we see women who really truly want to raise their children, but for whatever reason absolutely can't, and they will abandon their babies safely into a baby saver or at a place of safety, and often those are babies that are clothed, they've got a little blanket, they really are nurtured, and those are tragic stories. Then we see women who are just, they've given up, they're just desperate, they leave their babies where they give birth to them, so in a field, pop them in a dustbin. They don't necessarily want them to die, but they also just can't care for them, and they're not taking responsibility. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there are sometimes mothers who abandon with the intent to kill, and those are few and far between, but often those are the stories, unfortunately, that make the news.
Yeah, I think these are the discussions that we should continue having, Robyn Wolfson, because this week is the National Pregnancy Week.
Absolutely.
And National Condoms Week, February also being the National Reproductive Awareness Week. But I'm afraid we have to leave it at this. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thanks for having me.
All right, many thanks there to Robyn Wolfson Vorster, who is a child protection activist, of course, talking to us about this devastating numbers of abandoned children here in South Africa. 3,500 children are abandoned in South Africa every year. Okay, we're taking a quick break here on Your Story. There's still so much more to come. Don't go away.